So Lee Sin actually had a really interesting run at regionals when we honestly thought that this was more of like maybe a tier 2 deck, but not necessarily anything to really, take a look at. Well, when Jeff Jones ends up actually being the guy who pilots a Lee Sin deck, that is something to raise a brow at, and also something to have a pretty impressive run at that. So what is that deck list and gameplay, and who is Jeff Jones? Well, let's go ahead and dive right in. So yeah, that was kind of a really surprising thing when there was a feature match that was coming on, and all of a sudden we look over and someone's actually playing a Lee Sin. Now at the same time, the regionals actually did a pretty good job at giving a pretty diverse array of decks for people to be able to see in the gameplay, instead of, oh look, here's another Kaisa mirror, oh look, Yi versus Kaisa, oh Annie versus kind of what the highest decks are going to be. That's something that you're going to more so see in day 2, and that's exactly how it was. But in day 1, they actually did a pretty fun time of doing a lot of diverse decks, so we got to see some pretty fun stuff, even showing off in a Garen early on, which is interesting. So when we get towards the later end of day 1, we get joined by a Lee Sin that is deciding to take on the meta here. And it's going to be interesting because Jeff Jones is someone who needs to really be taken seriously just in card games in general. The main reason of that being that he has one of the most impressive records in competition with the game Yu-Gi-Oh! So, just so you guys know, he has won 3 major events in general, with Yu-Gi-Oh! And then on top of that, from 2019 to 22, he was a North American player with the highest amount of premiered event tops in the game. So already just a super experienced player right now. But what makes him so special? Well, he's also very well known to be a creative deck builder who regularly can come up with new deck techs and ideas to really help take it to the meta and to elevate the game to that next level. So then all of a sudden, here he comes in and is starting to go ahead and take a look at Riftbound, and he takes an unconventional deck that you might not necessarily see a whole lot of. I mean, here's the allocations of the decks in general, and Lee Sin is at the lower upper end, kind of mid-lower. And what do you expect with that? You don't expect to be necessarily making day 2, let alone taking down the top decks on a regular basis with this. But that didn't stop Jeff, not at all. And in fact, he had a really impressive game. But not only that, I mean, here we go. Look at, these are his runs. And you can even pause to take a look at how impressive all of these are, starting in 2010 and then, of course, ending in 2025, because that's the year we're in. And very interesting ideas to behold there. So this guy is one of the most competitive guys out there, has a mind for the game, and that's kind of what it seems like it can be for those who are at this level of competition. They just have a brain for the strategy of card games, so they're able to sit down, understand the deck tech, and then the biggest thing, which I think is important, they are able to find the best lines easier because they've already been tried and tested for those types of situations. Not only that, when they are casted, when they are playing at the top level, in the top 64, top 32, even in the finals in that case, they have already done so. So even just necessarily maybe the pressure of having that is a little lessened compared to someone who might be there that first time. I know for me in particular, when I was even at Vegas, it took me until about round 3 to really find my groove and comfort to be like, okay, here we go. It's just like another game. Let's go ahead and play it out and just have fun with it. But there was that nervousness, like, am I going to make the wrong mistakes? Am I going to draw bad? What am I going to do here? Who am I facing? Do I actually know these decks? And I really started second doubting myself about all of that. And so anyway, really interesting to be able to see. And we'll be looking at the gameplay footage here momentarily as well. Now, the biggest thing first and foremost is, of course, for those of you who might not know, Lee Sin is a really interesting deck because you can go ahead and pay 1 and buff a friendly unit. And, that's going to be really nice. Sure, you can only go ahead and buff max of 1 unless there's a card that says you are able to do so otherwise. But still, that 1 extra might can be a really big difference maker, especially with the Lee Sin signature here, which is going to be able to give other buffed friendly units at my battlefield have +2 might. So a total of 3 might when Lee Sin ends up attacking in, which is very helpful. Now, with that, before we get into that, we have also Grove of the God Willow, where when you hold here, draw 1. Then you also have Monastery of Hirana, which when you conquer here, you may spend a buff to draw 1. And then, of course, Obelisk of Power to get that little extra ramp so that you can enter into your end game that much sooner. So really fun to be able to see. And this deck in general is a little interesting in some of the choices that he made, but more so we're going to be looking at what he was able to do when presented with the situations of going against those top tier decks, and how he was able to then deal with the threats and issues that those decks are able to present, especially to a tier 2 deck. Now, first and foremost, Defy is going to be really good, especially into the Kaisa matchup, or really anything that you might not want to have going off that is a spell. You can go ahead and defy it. And you know, a lot of the cheaper spells are going to be the main ones that you're playing, so you have a lot of utility there by just playing Defy. Unguard at the same time will be able to give a friendly unit +1 might this turn, an additional 1 if they are the only unit you control there. So keep in mind, though, if you do play Unguard when you're in base and you have multiple units in your base, you only add 1. That's a very easy mistake. A lot of people just think it's a guaranteed 2 for 1. It's not. It needs to be a condition that is specifically met. So that's a little tricky there. Next, of course, is Charm, where you can just go ahead and move an enemy unit. That can be from one battlefield to another, from base to battlefield, from battlefield to base, whatever you might want to do, you are able to do so with Charm, and especially at the 1-for-1 power is an incredibly good cost. Pit Rookie, or Pookie, as some people call it. T-Mac, I'm still looking at you, man. I can't believe you got me hooked on that. Anyway, when you play me, buff another friendly unit. So that's going to be a good one because, of course, if you do end up playing it as your first 2-drop, it kind of sucks. The second 2-drop, though, can be really good and a lot of help on getting you going with a lot of that. So, really fun. Then, of course, Dawaporo, which has shield +1, Discipline, which adds +2, and draws a card at reaction speed. Challenge, where you are going to be able to choose a friendly unit and enemy unit. They deal damage equal to their mights to each other. Also really good. Clockwork Keeper, you can go ahead and recycle a green rune to be able to add an additional card to hand, which is really good to be able to have. Then on top of that, 3 hourglasses, which is insane. If a friendly unit would die, kill it instead, heal that unit, exhaust it, and recall it. And this isn't a move. That's a really big deal as well with something like Vile Maw's Lair as a battlefield. Sunlit Guardian, which has shield and tank, really good. Find your center to be able to draw a card and channel a rune for 3 unless your opponent has 5 or more points. Then it costs 1. Then also one of my favorite cards, Dragon Rage, either an expensive, expensive charm, or you can really move a unit into a battlefield and deal with either getting both of them taken out because they will deal damage to each other. So if they're at the same might, well, then both of them die. But if there's one that's at lesser might, then the lesser one, of course, will die, but that can even be a big threat taken care of for Dragon's Rage. Really decent signature spell. Then, of course, 3 Kianas, which has Deflect. And when I conquer, draw 1 or channel 1 rune, Exhausted. Really good for the situations you might need. Wizened Elder to go up to 6 when you go ahead and buff them. Really great early game. Udyr, who is able to go ahead and either spin the buff and deal 2 stun a unit, ready me, or give him ganking for the turn. Tasty Fatefolk to be able to accelerate for additional 1 and Calm Rune. And with Death Knell being one of the best ones in the game, channel 2 runes, Exhausted, and draw 1 when it dies. And then, of course, Dead Bloom Predator that has Deflect as well, and you can play him into an occupied battlefield. That's going to be one of the biggest cards there as well, because it's something that can really slow down your opponent and get you that immediate point. A lot of times you're going to be finding yourself falling a little bit behind, especially if you might not be able to play as fast of units as what you would maybe expect in Kaisa, and even just really in Red in general. I mean, Annie is able to utilize a lot of that as well, and that can be something to really have you missed the mark. You need those accelerated units. You need the Dead Blue Predators and things of that nature to really start to make your impact early on. It's why Annie can be so scary as well, because you have sneaky deckhands and accelerated units like Kaisa and Darius that can just go ahead and attack right in and do a lot of damage while also scoring a ton of points. Likewise, with the side deck, though, we're going to be doing 2 Unyielding Spirits, which are going to be able to prevent all spell and ability damage this turn, 2 Sabotages, 2 Rune Prisons, which is dang freaking good. You're going to be able to stun a unit right there. And then also 2 Primal Strengths to give a unit +7 this turn to really help protect your stuff, or even just be able to get over a big threat here. So all in all, a really good deck. So let's go ahead and look at the gameplay, because this is interesting. A lot of people do say that Lee Sin, of course, is that tier 2 deck. I don't necessarily think so, though. That's the interesting thing. At least, depending on this, it could definitely be in the higher tier 2. Now, yes, the consistency of what you're going to be seeing with Kaisa, the explosiveness and defense that Master Yi is able to have, same with the explosiveness and speed and aggro that Annie is able to have, definitely puts those in the top 3. But even still, Lee Sin can still show that even though I might be a higher tier 2 deck, I can still take it to the strongest cards of the meta, the strongest decks, and show you that I can go ahead and still have a good chance at winning. So, with that being said, here we go with the gameplay, and this is going to be an interesting one for sure. Now, of course, we are going to be seeing a Yi versus Kaisa. So, I already feel like, especially when playing against Lancet, one of the guys at my locals and everything, that the Lee Sin is already a good matchup into Kaisa. The main reason of that, of course, being the fact that it is able to get bigger than the spells that you are usually able to dish out. So this is going to be interesting to be able to see. And of course, even starting with an Hourglass might kind of suck here, but, for good reason, just because you do want to get those units out. But even still, this is going to be something that is going to be helpful to at least protect your stuff later on. Biggest thing here, as well, is you are going to want to start to build up your board presence. And this is also really interesting too, playing a Kaisa out early on. I get why you would do that, but a lot of times there is some threats every now and again to really take care of Kaisas before you are able to use them. Normally you do want to have them out with retreats or the ability to call them back in case, or if not, that you're at least guaranteed to go ahead and give them the boost that they need. At the same time, he probably had nothing else in hand to particularly build up his board, so it was a little bit of a desperation move, and even going ahead and playing the Kaisa back to then go ahead and channel the rune after the Conquer, and you're like, well, why are you going to do that? And it's because, well, he has also the Noxus Hopefuls to be able to build up the field. So a little bit of a step back there to be able to build up a wider board to go against this Master Yi here. Now, I would like to note also that both competitors right now are 5-1, so you want to go ahead and try to give it your all at this point on making it to day 2. You've already done half the battle here, and so it's going to be interesting to see. And the Kiana has just such a great ability for you to be able to either channel a rune or draw a card, but more importantly, and what we're going to see in this video too, the deflect cost is going to be a big difference maker, especially when going against Kaisa, because that really limits you to what you can potentially do to get over, Kiana without having to pay an arm and a leg. Because unless you have Cleave and Darius, Cleave and Noxus Hopeful, or even, things of that nature, you're going to be finding yourself in trouble. But with that, 3 runes up right now for the Lee Sin player. That could be a Discipline and an Unguard. That could be a number of things right there. And here's something that's really interesting that I do think is a good advantage too, is the fact that you are going to be finding yourself, if you're playing the Lee Sin, that a lot of competitors don't necessarily have a lot of experience into this matchup. So that in and of itself can already be a little bit of an advantage. Kaisa players are playing the Kaisamir, the Lee Sin, or the Master Yi's, the Annie matchups and things of that nature. Whereas, in this case, now you're going against a Lee Sin, and you're like, well, I know the color combination, but what could your deck be? You're 5-1, and so that can even be a bit of a save there as well. So something to definitely keep in mind there. So there goes the cleave, of course, going up to 7 when you are attacking in. Double checking that the spell goes off, that there are no defies. So now that it is going to be 7-5. So a discipline at this point, or an unguard at least, is going to be adding +2 at that point. So it is going to be a trade, and the Kiana, of course, will still come back to base with the buff on it. And so, again, you're almost okay with that trade a little bit, and even if you do have the discipline and the unguard, you don't want to overextend, because next turn you could go ahead and, still, the Kiana is still alive, and so you are able to continue to move about and do some really devastating things to the board state, and especially now that it is a 2-for-1. Now, here was the biggest mistake of the game. Icathian Rain. Well, you do it 6 times, and you're going to see Helpful Miner's reaction here, because there is a deflect cost. And you see his reaction right there, realizing what that actually means. And that alone is going to be a really devastating thing. Something to really, just tilt you a little bit in that case. And so sad to be able to see that kind of reaction there. And this is something that definitely can tilt you, going all the way down to literally 1 rune, and then going in against this. And again, still, the fact that he is 5-1 as a Lee Sin player does still say a lot, and this is one of the big games that I did want to still look at, even with this big of a mistake being made here. Even still, you are able to go ahead and build up a lot of your battlefield, but getting the Lee Sin out, accelerated at that, is going to be a great move, because there are a lot of things that you don't have to worry about. You're not going to be playing a Falling Star because you've already, checked out your runes in this case on accident. And so in this case, Lee Sin coming out accelerated, going for the point, using Dreaming Tree to go ahead, and if I target things, I'm going to be able to draw. It is just such a great ability to get some things utilized here. And the rune difference here is going to be one of the biggest things that locks down this game 1. And you can only imagine what Jeff Jones is feeling right now after that kind of mistake. And especially with card games, with TCGs, it is a mental game. You have to be calm-headed, level-headed at that point. And once you are tilted, you have to find a way to get yourself out of that as quickly as possible. Otherwise, it's just going to be a bad time, and you're not going to be able to do a lot of what you need to do. And especially with the misplays and things of that nature, that's going to be a big thing. And you already can see Helpful Miner. It's like, how are you going to be able to bounce back from that as well? That's the tough part. And at the same time, we are going to be seeing the field, ready to be taken here by Jeff Jones, with a lot to be had here. The fact that you have all the runes, you can go ahead and build up a lot in base. Icathian Rain is taken out. A lot of competitors run maybe 1 in the main deck, sometimes 2. And that is really going to be it. So the fact that you might not even see another Icathian Rain in this game 1 is a really big boost for Jeff Jones. Now, why there is not necessarily a whole lot of play going on right now is because we are looking at a judge ruling here for the current situation. And so we'll see how that is going to be ending up playing out here pretty quick. Let's go ahead, and I just don't want to skip ahead too much for sake of missing things. So it looks like we are going to be going ahead and playing out a Tasty Fae Folk, also accelerated in that case, recycling the rune for the acceleration and going in the Hirana. Now, of course, he's going to still be having the 1 up, so that can be a Defy or things of that nature. He also could have gone ahead and spent the buff to go ahead and put it on the Tasty, spend the buff to also draw a card, but he is good in the card draw and everything, so to have the 1 left is going to be a pretty big difference maker. Even still, Helpful Miner is still only at 5 runes in this case, with a student at this point on the board. So Akaisa coming in is going to be a little bit helpful to at least get some things moving, but even still, you're not able to go ahead and take up a lot of the battlefield. Even still, though, it is going to be 4-5. So that's not necessarily a whole, or 4-6. Sorry, they had the points wrong. But even still, here we go with the Dragon's Rage. What that is going to specifically do is move the Kaisa into the Dreaming Tree, and then they are going to be dealing damage to each other in a showdown at that point. And so if there's no responses, and it's also a great way to bait out like, ooh, a Cleave though, and then a Defy. So great reaction there. Cleave was well timed as well, but you're more so hoping for potentially the retreat or things of that nature. But Defy will shut down all of those all the same. And a Kiana, the bane of Helpful Miner's existence, unfortunately, is going to be had. And then the buff coming out from the Lee Sin Legend ability. And so already we are looking at a big shift. You got to try to go ahead and take both of these battlefields, but it just doesn't seem like it's something that's going to be possible. But still, with a little bit of help of Singularity, could get that job done, especially with the student going ahead and getting boosted as well. But even still, going up to 7. Ooh, actually, the Tasty Faithfolk will be taken out by a Hextech Ray, dealing 3 damage to a unit at a battlefield. And then, of course, just going to immediately accelerate again, tapped out. The Kiana would be able to take the other battlefield. So right there, already a great game one from Jeff Jones. Now, even with the Acathian Rain, it does feel like that would still be something to definitely slow things down in that case, especially taking out the Lee Sin would be a great help there. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. The Kiana, the Deflect, is a lesson that Hopeful Miner will not soon forget. We've all been there. We've all made those kinds of mistakes. It just sucks that, you are making that after already being 5-1 in a major tournament. That's something that, no one would necessarily want to wish on anyone there. So here we are going into game number 2, though, immediately going up to 1 point. Azan Warrens versus Obelisk of Power. So everyone is able to go ahead and channel an additional rune. Now with that, of course, another Ravenbloom student is going to be coming out. And a Noxus Hopeful to defend. Some things you have to be careful about, though, and the mistake here that could be made is that you are able to go ahead and pump up a lot of units pretty easily with green and orange. And so already, though, you already see the buff with the legend ability from the prior turn. So any disciplines or anything of that matter could go ahead and really shift the tides in this case. Now, you still do definitely have to be mindful of the falling stars and things of that nature, which is why these are getting buffed up as much as they are. And because of that, it's really nice because now you'll either have to use like 2 Stupefies, or in that case, you're going to have to just really overextend. That 4 Might is going to be a huge difference maker in this particular matchup. So something to really keep in mind about that. Now, Helpful Miner, you definitely do got to still try to make the decisions here. Going to be playing a Kaisa out. And potentially would be keeping a Void Seeker in hand at the ready for when one is attacking in. That way, your losses are mitigated there. Now, of course, Void Seeker can still be defied. And so that's something that you do definitely have to keep in mind. And with it being 2-2, this is going to be a big turn for Jeff Jones. He's going to have to build up his arsenal a little bit wider. And if he's able to do so and counteract a couple of things, and a Deadbloom Predator is going to be a great start at that. That's going to be 8. And no response, which is a sad tale to be seen there. That is a great answer. And then, of course, of that, with a card being face down, it very could well be a Hourglass. That's most likely what it's going to be. You don't know what the deck lists are until day 2, so that is a blind card. But it's safe to say that is going to be Zhonya's Hourglass. Still could be something a little cheeky like Block, or something which adds Shield +3 and Tank, and that could be very devastating as well. But, the biggest thing is a lot of people don't see Block actually being played. So in a Lee Sin deck in particular, it could be something to really surprise your opponents when you do actually play that card. Now, the biggest thing, too, is Jeff Jones did sacrifice a lot of runes at this point in order to get to this state of the battle. That was 3 runes last turn that he was able to sacrifice there. There's 7 on the side, and in that case, there goes a Watcher. So 8 runes, 2 recycled, accelerated at that point, and for a -3. And that's going to be the biggest thing with a tapped out unit. Or with a tapped out Lee Sin, that's going to be very helpful. But unfortunately, the Hourglass is going to be saving the Dead Bloom Predator. So that is devastating to behold. And that's also hard just because, well, the Thousand Tail Watcher is pretty much just going to be losing their life the next turn. And again, didn't want to go ahead and overextend on the Kaisa as well, because again, that would just be another trade at that point. And yeah, you would be getting a point. You would be getting a card drawn at that point, and you got to decide for yourself if moves like that is going to be something worth it there. And there's the retreat with the Defy again. And biggest thing is Jeff Jones has just been able to have a lot of the answers to go ahead and devastate his opponent at that point. Discarding also is on warrants to go ahead and draw a card, and being able to get another point going 5-3. And you got to imagine how many games Jeff Jones has particularly played here against Kaisa in general. This is a matchup that he does have to feel very comfortable with. A Charm coming in to take out the Kaisa. And there's very little that it seems like Helpful Miner is going to be able to do to get back into this game. Yes, you at least have the runes this game, but when you only have a student out and another Zonia is coming out onto the battlefield with a buffed Dead Bloom Predator, that is going to be something very difficult to try to take down at that point. And 2 more runes channeled, a card drawn. And it's like, what do you do with such a wide field? And again, this is some really good strategy as well. I love that Jeff was able to go ahead and pull back a lot of the Sunlit Guardians back to base to make sure that they weren't going to be able to be destroyed by like a Darius Cleave or things of that nature. Something to be very mindful of. That's a number 1 big threat to take out your battlefields that you've spent so hard building. And that can really devastate. And Amundo at this point just feels like a dead card. It's a desperation move. And you can only imagine that at this point you're like, okay, cool. I think I got this game. I don't know what else you're going to maybe necessarily be able to do. And at that point, it's like, do I just go ahead and pull back? Or do I try to hold and see what I can do? So they're going to be checking on the might that the Mundo is going to be able to get. That's going to be a +7. So a total of, at that point, 13 to be able to take care of. But even still, that's not necessarily anything to worry about. But still, looks like Jeff is going to be going ahead and taking some things back, leaving the Dead Bloom Predator because of the Hourglass. So some really good options there. But even still, at this point, the Acathian Rain could be really good, even for just taking out the backfield, and for that matter, because the Hourglass would take one of them out. But a Lee Sin to come out as well to defend and buffing it might be that final cut needed to go ahead and get the victory against his opponent. Now, of course, Mundo's ability says that 3 needs to go ahead and be put to the bottom of the deck at the beginning of your upkeep. So the Mundo shrinks by 3 at that point. And that already is getting to be a little bit more devastating. It's like, how are you going to be able to go ahead? At least, though, the Lee Sin is tapped out. That's going to be the big thing here. Something to be very mindful of. And a Cleave is going to be going in. So +3 is added, then also a 1 for the student. And this could be a different matchup. And playing the buffed Lee Sin is such a great ability too, because don't forget that it also adds +2 to the Dead Bloom Predator because it is also buffed. So that Dead Bloom Predator, I mean, it's at 9 for the buff, then +2 because of the Lee Sin. So immediately just add 11 in and of itself. So a singularity is going to be pretty solid. You're pretty much going to be going ahead and double tapping at that point. I don't know, as an option on the Lee Sin. That'll be a lot more manageable. Still, though, 4 damage that is going to be going on to the Lee Sin. And again, every card that you discard is going to add more to the Mundo at that point. So a 6 added to that, so 12, and then 6 on top of that is a lot to be watchful of. And nothing to be mindful of there. So it looks like the Lee Sin is going to be saved at that point. And rightfully so. That can be an easy mistake to make because the Denbloom Predator is sometimes more favored in this case. But the Lee Sin ability to add +2 is going to be a big difference maker on the clapback here. Now, of course, the assaults are going to be disappearing at that point, but still, that is a lot of might that you do have to get over at that point. And 4 runes still. Ooh, and the student going ahead and taking over the other battlefield, going up to 5 points, but still, having Jeff be at 7 is already a lot to be mindful of. Double Conquer would win this game, and 2 units remain. And also, playing a student back in the battlefield is really interesting there as well. Almost would just want to still go ahead and play it out in the Zon Warrens. In case I had any other answers, I could then go ahead and just buff up a little bit more on trying to make this battlefield a bit harder to take. Still, a Primal would be just absolutely paramount here on trying to take this battlefield. And at the same time, Helpful Miner doesn't have the most cards in hand, so maybe a Smoke Screen being able to come in at this point. But even then, Tice has actually kind of stepped back a little bit from the Smoke Screen, so something that you need to be a little bit careful about. And still really interesting, too. Looks like we are going to be trying to take the other battlefield. And now the biggest thing is, do we go on full reinforce there, or do we have like a Primal or something to really go ahead and take it on? And it looks like, yeah, in this case, we are just going to fully buff everything up, see what we are able to do, and go from there. And then the Charm to move the Mundo over. That will activate the shields as well of the Sunlets to add +1, and then not only that, the Lee Sin is going to be adding +2 to each of the Sunlets as well, and each of them, if I remember correctly, have Tank on top of that, so they are absolutely buffed. Both are going to fall, and we are going to see just a Lee Sin at that point, and still, then a Tasty Feyfolk to come in accelerated to win the game as the Lee Sin takes the victory. And again, that was still a very great match. While, yes, Game 1 did have that major misplay of the Acathian Rain on a deflect unit. That's something that's very normal on happening sometimes, especially with the pressure, even of just being casted, let alone of being closer ever to getting to day 2 with a 5-1. That's something that can just be very nerve-wracking the later on that you go, and it can be so easy, especially with the exhaustion. We have a lot of people who are coming from all over the world to play at this regionals, and you gotta keep sharp with that, and it can be an easy mistake that can cost you sometimes the championship as well. And in that case, we saw a Acathian Rain on a Kiana was able to do just that. But guys, Lee Sin, interesting to behold there. Great matchup. The 3 Deadbloom Predators are definitely pretty expensive. That's exactly why it's like, well, if I get the 3 Deadbloom Predators, why wouldn't I then just go ahead and, build, Master Yi, who is already a better deck for pretty much the same exact price? And that in lies, well, which legend ability do you like a little bit more? And you were able to see, well, that was actually pretty impressive on what Lee Sin was able to do. And those legend abilities, and as well as that champion ability of Lee Sin, was able to make such a big difference. So, if you happen to have 3 Deadbloom Predators lying around, go ahead and take a look at Jeff Jones's deck. It'll be down in the description below. An absolutely fascinating run that he was able to go ahead and do. But that's going to be all for now, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and until next time,
Have a good one.